Dong 1. You might think a hero wears a badge or a cape, but sometimes, if you're someone who believes in second chances, he just waits quietly by a breakfast table, quiet bravery watching over the one he loves. This is the story of a little girl and the power of love on four legs. Stay with us. Like this video, a loyal dog. Subscribe to our channel, and the day silence barked louder than any scream. And let this story remind you, not all heroes need to speak to be heard. The morning sun filtered through a curtain of soft coastal fog as seaside Oregon stirred awake. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind where the salt air carried the promise of waffles, sea breeze, and a day spent without hurry. On Main Street, nestled between a local art gallery and a vintage bookshop, stood Anderson's Table, a family-run restaurant with navy blue shutters and a porch strung with warm Edison bulbs, even in daylight. Inside, the warmth of cinnamon, brewed coffee, and sizzling bacon greeted guests before the doorbell even chimed. The clatter of pans echoed from the kitchen, where Kyle Anderson, the owner and head chef, moved with the graceful efficiency of a man who'd lived many lives, but chose this one. Kyle, a 38-year-old widower, had sandy brown hair always pulled into a neat bun, a square jaw often hidden beneath a short, dark beard, and eyes that held more fatigue than his age warranted. He once served as a Navy culinary specialist, but after his wife Anna passed from cancer 4 years ago, he poured his grief and love into Anderson's Table, a dream they had built together. Since then, his world had revolved around two things: the restaurant and his daughter, Lucy. Lucy, 5 years old, had her mother's golden curls and her father's quiet resilience. On Sunday mornings, she loved sitting at table 7, the booth near the kitchen where she could swing her feet and watch her dad shout orders over the pass window. Today she wore her favorite yellow sweater with a stitched bumblebee and her boots, even though the floor was clean and dry. Her laughter was soft and silly, still innocent of the burdens life had placed on her father. Guarding the kitchen doorway, as he always did, was Thor. Thor was no ordinary dog, a retired military K9, 10 years old, lean with grizzled black and tan fur, and a faint scar running across the bridge of his nose, a reminder from Afghanistan. His ears always stood alert, his eyes deep in amber, reading the room like a book he'd memorized. Though his active duty days were behind him, Thor's instincts never dulled. He was quiet, deliberate, and protective. Most regulars at the restaurant knew better than to reach toward him without Kyle's permission. And yet, he had never so much as growled inside those walls. Not once. At 8:15 a.m., the front door opened with a chime, and Claire Harper stepped in. Claire was the newest hire, early 30s, with auburn hair always tucked into a bun, pale skin, and a soft voice that often ended her sentences with a question. She had been working at the restaurant for 3 weeks, always on time, polite, and eager to please. She had mentioned she was from Minnesota and had moved west for a new start. She wore a pink hoodie and blue jeans, an apron tied around her waist, and she always seemed to keep her distance from Thor, though she smiled nervously when he glanced her way. "Good morning, Lucy," Claire chirped as she emerged from the kitchen, holding a tall glass filled with strawberry banana smoothie. "Look what I made just for you," Lucy clapped and bounced in her seat. "Thank you, Miss Claire." Claire reached over, spoon in hand, coaxing a sip toward the little girl's lips. "Just one taste, sweetie. It's got honey in it today." At that exact moment, Thor, who had been lying by the pantry, shot up, not with a bark, not with a growl, but a full-bodied lunge, his nails clattering against the polished tile like a burst of hail. Before anyone could react, he was airborne, jaws locking onto Claire's forearm with terrifying speed and precision. The spoon flew across the table. Lucy screamed, high and panicked, dropping her plush turtle. Claire yelped in confusion and pain, stumbling backward, her back slamming into the counter. "Thor! Out!" Kyle's voice thundered through the kitchen, the kind of command trained handlers reserve for life or death. Thor released immediately. Blood seeped through Claire's sleeve as she crumpled to the floor, clutching her arm. She didn't scream now, only looked up with wide, horrified eyes. Lucy sobbed loudly, trembling in her seat. Kyle ran to her first, pulling Lucy from the booth, holding her close as her tears soaked into his shirt. He turned his head to Thor, who had retreated near the pantry again, standing alert, not pacing, not aggressive, just watching. His eyes locked on something that hadn't moved, the smoothie glass, now tipped slightly on the table, a pink smear across its rim. Claire's voice cracked. He went crazy. I didn't do anything. I was feeding her." Kyle didn't respond immediately. His eyes drifted toward the dropped spoon, then to the thick pink smear on the counter. It didn't look like banana. It looked wrong. Outside, the sound of sirens began to rise. Someone had clearly called emergency services. The windows shook faintly with the approach of help. Thor didn't flinch. He didn't snarl. He just sat, his gaze never leaving that glass. The air outside Anderson's table had warmed slightly by mid-morning, but the mood inside was anything but calm. The tables that once held quiet chatter and the clink of forks now stood silent. The regulars had been ushered out gently, most whispering theories or staring at the blood-stained napkins near table 7 before hurrying off. Lucy had stopped crying, but clung to Kyle's chest like a baby koala, her little fingers buried in the folds of his flannel shirt. Thor sat near the back exit, leashed now, eyes still locked on the countertop. His ears twitched occasionally, but he made no move to growl or pace. If anything, he looked sorrowful, conflicted, as if unsure if he'd done something wrong. But Kyle knew better. Thor had served beside Marines in Kandahar. He'd detected landmines buried 6 inches deep, once saved Kyle's life by dragging him out of an ambushed Humvee, and had never, not once, bitten without cause. Whatever had triggered him this morning was more than just nerves or trauma. Claire had been taken to urgent care by paramedics, mostly superficial injuries but dramatic in presentation. As she was being loaded into the ambulance, she kept yelling about lawsuits and unstable dogs. "He's dangerous! You're lucky your kid wasn't next!" she shrieked through tears, clenching her injured arm. Kyle's jaw had tightened, but he hadn't responded. Not then. Now, standing in the kitchen, Kyle leaned over the fallen smoothie glass. The pink trail had dried slightly across the laminate countertop. He picked up the spoon with a paper napkin, then grabbed the glass and sniffed cautiously. Banana, sure, strawberry, but something else. Faint, metallic, like rust or a snapped penny. He had worked with enough chemicals in military rations and kitchens to recognize that this wasn't cinnamon or honey. He glanced at the entrance to the pantry, where Thor still sat, unmoving. The scar on the dog's snout twitched slightly. "You were trying to tell me," Kyle whispered. He grabbed a Ziploc bag from the storage drawer, scraped a dollop of the smoothie inside, sealed it, and tucked it into his coat pocket. He wasn't going to the police, not yet. He needed someone he trusted, someone who wouldn't ask 100 questions or put Thor on a dangerous animal list before the truth came out. So, he drove east along the edge of town to a squat, ranch-style building surrounded by towering pines. Pine Coast Veterinary and Wildlife Center. Dr. Kelly Barnett had once been a military veterinarian, now semi-retired. She ran the clinic more out of love than necessity. In her early 50s, Kelly had graying curls tied in a messy bun, arms freckled from years of field work, and always wore faded jeans and hiking boots. Her demeanor was both gentle and unsentimental, the result of seeing too many injured creatures and too many grieving owners. When Kyle walked into the clinic holding the Ziploc bag like evidence from a crime scene, she didn't even blink. "You've got that, don't ask me why, just test this look," she said dryly. It came from Lucy's breakfast. "Thor flipped out this morning, bit someone," Kyle said in a low voice, handing over the sample. "But he wasn't being violent. He was warning us." Kelly took the bag and gave it a quick once-over. "You're lucky he did. I'll run a quick panel and let you know what I find." Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, a young man named Jordan Nguyen finished stacking crates of onions near the walk-in fridge. Jordan was 22, Vietnamese-American, lean with jet-black hair always hidden beneath a backward cap, and worked as a part-time delivery runner for local produce. Smart but quiet, he'd grown up helping his parents run a nail salon across town, and had learned early on to observe before speaking. Today, though, something gnawed at his gut. Jordan had been in the back freezer an hour before the incident, dropping off eggs and spinach. He had seen Claire go inside not long after. She hadn't noticed him. She'd been digging in her purse, then reaching behind the shelving, fumbling with something in the shadows. He didn't think much of it at the time, maybe hiding a vape or stealing a snack. But after what had just happened, he glanced around. The restaurant was closed. Emma, the head server and unofficial manager, had stepped outside to smoke and answer phone calls. Jordan quietly walked into the storage room, scanning the high shelf where Claire had been earlier. Nothing obvious, just the usual inventory: canned tomatoes, flour, and a dusty crate of aprons. But then he noticed the space behind a box of pancake syrup, a piece of white cloth, no paper towel shoved behind it. He pulled it free. Folded inside was a used plastic dropper, no label, no markings. He held it up to the light. Something clear and viscous clung to the tip. Jordan's stomach dropped. He pocketed it, then turned as Emma re-entered. Emma Brooks, 34, was a tall, broad-shouldered woman with tight red curls and a booming voice. But beneath the sass and sarcasm was someone fiercely loyal and kind. She'd taken over management duties after Anna passed, claiming Kyle needed a boss who wasn't his kid. She wasn't good with kids, but Lucy liked her, and that softened Emma in quiet ways. "What are you doing back here, ninja boy?" Emma asked, raising a brow. I thought I saw something weird earlier with Claire," Jordan muttered. "She was back here acting sketchy. I didn't say anything before, but now I think I should." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Show me." Jordan hesitated, then pulled out the dropper. Emma took one look and said, "That's going straight to Kyle, now." Back at the vet clinic, Kelly looked up from her microscope. "Kyle, there's definitely a chemical signature here that doesn't belong in a smoothie. Not yet a full tox panel, but I'm seeing something glycol-based. Could be antifreeze ethylene glycol." Kyle's jaw clenched. "That stuff can kill a dog, or a kid." Kelly nodded grimly. "Even in small doses, and this sample smells fresh. Whatever this is, it was added recently." Kyle thanked her and stepped out into the cold air, heart pounding. The wind picked up, rustling the pine trees, and for a moment, the whole world felt too quiet. His fingers brushed the dog tag on his keychain, the one Thor used to wear in the field. He climbed into the truck and headed back toward the restaurant. He didn't know what Claire's game was, but he was going to find out before anyone else got hurt. The next morning in Seaside broke with a dull gray sky and the faint scent of ocean salt on the breeze. A cold mist clung to the sidewalks, dampening newspaper stands and the porch railing of Anderson's table. Inside the house above the restaurant, Kyle sat slumped at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold an hour ago. He hadn't slept. Lucy had cried herself hoarse the night before and eventually passed out in his arms, her small body burning with fever. Not from illness, he suspected, but from heartbreak and fear. Thor was gone. They'd come around 8 p.m. 2 officers in Navy windbreakers bearing the county seal had arrived with a clipboard and a temporary detainment order. Standard protocol, they'd said. Thor had bitten someone, and until an evaluation by an animal behaviorist was completed, he had to be placed in isolation. No criminal charges for now, but the county animal control van took him away like he was some stray off the street. Kyle had tried to argue, waving the vet results and Kelly's early report, but it didn't matter, not yet. Procedure was procedure. Lucy had watched from the window, her face pressed against the glass, a damp washcloth on her forehead. She didn't scream, just whispered, "Why are they taking Thor, Daddy?" over and over again. Now, in the stillness of the morning, Kyle stared at the empty dog bowl by the pantry door and felt the silence tighten around his chest like wire. Thor was family, and family didn't belong in cages. The front door creaked open. Emma stepped in, her eyes rimmed with fatigue, a travel mug in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. "I brought everything Claire filled out when she got hired," she said, without waiting for a greeting. "Did some digging?" Kyle nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She dropped the documents onto the table. Her name, Claire Harper, checks out on her driver's license, but the social security number couldn't match it to anything in the standard employment verification portal. Like, it exists, but not where it should. Her references are just phone numbers, no business names, no formal email addresses. 1 voicemail, 1 wrong number, and 1 never answered. Kyle sifted through the pages. Claire had seemed clean, sweet even, but now the seams were unraveling. "Could be stolen identity," he muttered. "Or she's covering up something worse," Emma added grimly. Just then, Kyle's phone buzzed. He snatched it up like it might vanish. "Kelly?" Dr. Kelly Barnett's voice was clipped but steady. "Just got the final toxicology confirmation, ethylene glycol, no doubt. Antifreeze and recent. It hadn't broken down chemically yet, which means it was added within 2 hours of consumption, small but potent enough to kill a child if ingested over consecutive days. Thor was right, Kyle. He didn't attack, he intervened. Kyle felt something hot rise in his throat. Relief, rage, guilt. Maybe all of it. Thanks, Kelly. Let me know when you're free. I need that in writing, official. You got it, but Kyle... She paused. You need to keep your daughter close. If this woman was trying to poison her, it wasn't a random mistake. Someone like that doesn't stop until they're caught or something worse happens. After ending the call, Kyle turned to Emma. We need to dig deeper. If she used a fake identity, there's gotta be a trail somewhere. Emma exhaled, her hands pressed together. I know someone who might help. He's a regular here, used to do freelance background checks for corporate security. Works out of the sheriff's office now, part-time. Name's Darren McBride. Real techie guy. Bit of a conspiracy nut, but he's got skills. Kyle nodded. Set it up. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, inside the county animal shelter on Ridgeway Drive, Thor lay quietly in a concrete kennel lined with a scratchy gray blanket and a rubber water bowl. The place smelled of bleach and wet fur. Other dogs barked and whined from adjacent cages, but Thor didn't react. He stared at the metal gate in front of him, head resting on his front paws, tail still, breath slow and measured. He wasn't scared, but he was confused. Shelter technician Melanie Price, a woman in her late 20s with dyed green bangs and a nose ring, had been on duty during intake. She was used to aggressive dogs. She had scars on both forearms to prove it, but Thor hadn't lunged or growled. He had simply walked in, sat where she pointed, and allowed her to close the gate behind him. She had watched him for 20 minutes since and saw nothing violent, just a dog waiting for his person to come back. Back at Anderson's table, Jordan returned from his early deliveries. His canvas jacket was wet from drizzle, and he had a bag of apples tucked under one arm. When he entered the kitchen, he found Kyle still staring at the documents, a notepad open with lines of scribbled notes and half-thoughts. I remembered something else, Jordan said hesitantly, brushing water off his shoulders. Day before yesterday, I saw Claire walk out of the alley behind the restaurant. It was weird because she didn't park there, and she wasn't on break. Kyle looked up. You sure? Yeah. She was putting something into her bag and looking around like she didn't want anyone seeing her. She didn't even say hi. Thanks, Jordan, Kyle said, his voice tighter than usual. That's helpful, Emma chimed in. We'll add it to the list. The more we know, the better we can prove Thor didn't act out of nowhere. That evening, as the fog rolled in again and the first flickers of street lamps came to life, Kyle stepped into the shower, letting the water burn against his neck. When he finally crawled into bed beside Lucy's, she was already asleep, clutching Thor's old collar like a teddy bear. Come home soon, Thor, she murmured in her sleep. Kyle didn't answer, but his eyes remained open long after the room went dark. The rain had settled into a soft drizzle that afternoon, blanketing Seaside in a quiet gray haze. It was the kind of weather that muted footsteps and made the whole town feel like it was holding its breath. Inside Anderson's table, the kitchen was closed, chairs stacked, lights dimmed to a low amber. Kyle sat alone in the office tucked behind the pantry, the glow of the small security monitor casting shadows on his face. He had reviewed the tapes a dozen times now, mostly fast-forwarding through dull loops of prep work and cleaning. But today, he was looking for something specific, something definitive. Lucy's attack wasn't a coincidence, and Thor's actions weren't a mistake. They were a warning. Kyle's instincts, sharpened by years of war and fatherhood, told him he was looking at something deliberate. But now, he needed proof. He scrubbed back to Sunday morning. 8:03 a.m. There she was, Claire stepping into the kitchen. Her hair was slightly damp from the morning fog, the same pale pink hoodie, her movements fast but practiced. She set down her purse on the counter, glancing around as if to make sure no one was watching. Kyle leaned forward, heart ticking faster. At 8:04 a.m., she reached into the front pocket of her purse and pulled out a small, unlabeled glass dropper bottle. She uncapped it, tilted it, and with surgical smoothness, released a clear liquid into the blender where she was prepping the smoothie. She stirred once with the spoon, capped the bottle, and slipped it back into her bag. The timer in the footage read 8:05. Claire wiped her hands, lifted the smoothie glass, and walked out of frame straight toward Lucy at table 7. Kyle froze the frame. His knuckles were white around the mouse. He reached for his phone, snapped a photo of the paused screen, and texted it to Emma with one word: got her. 5 minutes later, Emma stepped into the office, cheeks flushed with urgency, still wearing her dark gray apron dusted in the flour. "I saw it," she said, breathless. "That's enough. No one can call Thor dangerous now." "She's not just unhinged," Kyle muttered. "She's methodical." Emma leaned against the doorframe. "Jordan said she used to write in a notebook during her breaks, said she kept it in the walk-in freezer. You think she's dumb enough to leave it there?" "If we're lucky," Kyle said, "or maybe arrogant enough to believe no one would ever find it." The two walked back into the kitchen, cold air biting as they stepped into the industrial freezer. Condensation clung to the metal shelves. Kyle moved crates of frozen potatoes and wrapped salmon aside, while Emma crouched low near the storage bins. She paused. "Got something." Tucked between 2 boxes of frozen peas was a Ziploc bag with a small, worn notebook inside. Pages slightly warped from moisture, but mostly intact. The cover was plain black, frayed at the corners. Emma handed it to Kyle without a word. Back in the office, Kyle peeled open the pages. The handwriting was neat, obsessively tidy, like a student's notes. The first few entries were innocent enough, logistics about smoothie recipes, reminders for cleaning duties. But halfway through, the tone changed. "She trusts me now, the little one. She smiles when I sing to her. Kyle always leaves the kitchen at 8 a.m. I wait exactly 2 minutes. The dog watches. He doesn't blink. This time, I'll do it right. This one deserves better." Kyle stared at the page, his pulse thudding in his ears. These weren't notes. They were confessions, plans, rationalizations. Claire wasn't unstable in the way people whispered about. She was intentional. Emma read over his shoulder, her voice low. "We need to turn this in, now." "We will," Kyle said. "But first, I'm making copies." Meanwhile, Jordan had returned from a delivery run and found Lucy in the front booth, coloring quietly. She was pale but calm now, bundled in a yellow knit cardigan, her curls damp with sweat from her earlier fever. Jordan hesitated, then walked over with a paper bag of cookies from the bakery next door. "Hey, champ," he said, crouching down. "Want to trade me one drawing for a cookie?" Lucy blinked up, then shyly slid her drawing across the table. It was of Thor, sitting like a king with a golden crown. Jordan smiled. "Deal." As he sat across from her, Emma passed through the dining area with her usual purposeful stride. Jordan watched her go, then turned back to Lucy. "Is your dad always this serious?" he asked. Lucy nodded. "But he makes good pancakes." Jordan chuckled. "Yeah, that tracks." When Emma re-entered, her hair pulled back into a loose bun and her hands dusted with flour again, she gave Jordan a subtle nod. "Thanks for earlier," she said. "About the dropper." He scratched the back of his neck. "No problem. I just couldn't shake the feeling something was off. I'm glad I wasn't wrong." Emma paused, then smiled. Not the quick, sarcastic smirk she usually wore, but a genuine, grateful one. "You weren't." Back in the office, Kyle printed scans of every notebook page, backing up the camera footage to a secure drive. Then he placed the original notebook in a sealed envelope, labeled it, and slid it into a drawer marked legal. He stared at the drawer for a long time, then turned to the corkboard above his desk. A photo of Thor Tongue lolling, Lucy hugging him from behind. Pinned beside a drawing Lucy had made of their restaurant with rainbow smoke coming from the chimney. He tapped his fingers against the desk. There was more to this. He could feel it. But for now, he had enough to clear Thor's name. The fog hung heavier than usual that morning, low and unmoving, as if the town of Seaside itself didn't want to wake. From the window of Anderson's table's second-floor office, Kyle watched the clouds drift slowly over the rooftops, coffee cooling untouched in his hands. The notebook sat on the desk beside him, its contents burned into his mind. Every entry, every line of precise handwriting had painted a portrait of someone deeply disturbed, someone who believed she was saving Lucy from a future that existed only in her own twisted past. Claire wasn't who she said she was, and Kyle intended to find out exactly who she really was. Downstairs, Jordan leaned against the stainless steel counter of the prep station, flipping through the few photos he'd managed to discreetly snap from Claire's abandoned purse. One picture in particular had caught his attention. A faded Polaroid of the Claire, younger, hair darker and shoulder length, standing beside a child whose face was half obscured by motion blur. On the back, a handwritten note in cursive read, "Taken before the case, don't lose this one." He brought the photo to Kyle upstairs. "This was wedged between old receipts in her wallet," Jordan explained, setting the Polaroid on the desk. "No names, but that handwriting. It matches the notebook." Kyle stared at the photo. The woman, Claire, or whoever she really was, looked thinner, but unmistakable. Same cheekbones, same wary smile. But it was her eyes that stood out, wide, calculating, just like the gaze that watched Lucy across breakfast plates. "Jordan," Kyle said, his voice low. "You're good with online databases, right?" Jordan nodded, his mouth tightening. "I used to help my cousin file court papers back in Sacramento. We looked up stuff, public records, mugshots, parole lists. I want you to search this photo, any way you can. If she has a past, it's buried somewhere in state archives." Jordan took the photo and disappeared into the back office, his shoulders squared in a way Kyle hadn't seen before, determined. Outside, seaside streets began to stir. The fog didn't lift, but cars rolled slowly past, headlights glowing faintly in the haze. Inside the restaurant, Emma was prepping a batch of fresh sourdough in silence. She hadn't asked questions when Kyle handed her the notebook to read, but her silence afterward had said everything. She'd placed the book down, washed her hands slowly, and said, "When this is over, I'm taking Lucy to the zoo, just us girls." Kyle had nodded, unable to speak. An hour later, Jordan reappeared, his phone in hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I found her," he said. Kyle leaned forward, heartbeat in his throat. "Her real name is Mallory Keene, arrested in Illinois 6 years ago for child endangerment and neglect. Apparently, she was a live-in nanny. Accused of underfeeding and isolating a 5-year-old girl for weeks. Case got media coverage. There's even a scanned article. Served time, paroled, then changed her name legally in Arkansas about 2 years ago. Now goes by Claire Harper." Kyle stared at the screen. The mugshot showed a disheveled woman with hollow cheeks and a haunting stare, identical despite the time gap. Beneath the photo were the words, "Mallory Keene sentenced to 18 months for repeated abuse, pleads not guilty. Claims she was protecting the child from evil influences." "She's mentally unstable," Jordan said. "Her defense was that she thought the kid was corrupted, and now she's here, with Lucy." Kyle didn't wait another second. He picked up his phone and called the Seaside Police Department. The dispatcher recognized his voice immediately and patched him through to Sheriff Claire Donovan. Sheriff Donovan, 46, was a sharp-featured woman with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense tone, known around town for balancing warmth with authority. She had served 3 tours as a military police officer before returning to Seaside to care for her aging father. Her experiences in uniform left her with a deep appreciation for quiet observation and a distrust of anything that felt too perfect. "What have you got, Kyle?" she asked, without pleasantries. "I need to report a false identity case. The woman who's been working for me isn't who she says she is. Her real name is Mallory Keene, past child abuse charges in Illinois. She's been living here under the name Claire Harper. We have photo evidence, handwriting comparisons, and a notebook full of extremely disturbing entries. I also have security footage of her tampering with my daughter's drink." There was a pause. Then Sheriff Donovan replied, "Bring everything to the station. I want physical copies and digital backups. We'll verify the ID and move fast. If what you're saying checks out, we'll escalate this to state level." Kyle exhaled, only half relieved. "And Thor? If the footage and the vet's report support your claim, we'll contact animal control immediately. You have my word." They hung up. As Kyle began printing the documents and transferring files to a USB drive, Emma walked in with Lucy on her hip. The little girl's fever had gone down, but her voice was still weak. "I want Thor back," she said softly, resting her head on Emma's shoulder. Kyle kneeled and took her hand. "We're working on it, Bug. He's going to come home soon, I promise." Lucy nodded, trusting him the way only a child could, completely. Later that evening, as the last file finished uploading and the evidence packed into a manila folder, Kyle looked at Jordan. "Thank you. You didn't have to dig this deep." Jordan shrugged. "She almost hurt Lucy. That makes it personal." Emma, standing by the office door, gave him a look, soft, appreciative. "I owe you a coffee, or something stronger." Jordan smiled sheepishly. Deal! Outside, the fog had finally begun to lift. The town of Seaside settled into an eerie stillness as night blanketed the streets. The fog from earlier had lifted, leaving the windows clear but the air cold and dense. Anderson's table was quiet, its front windows dark, the closed sign swinging gently with the wind. Upstairs, Kyle lay fully dressed on the pull-out couch in the storage office. A baseball bat leaned against the wall, and his phone face up on the armrest. He hadn't closed his eyes once since dusk. Lucy, now free of her fever, slept curled up in the booth across the dining room, wrapped in a fleece blanket printed with yellow ducks. She clutched Thor's collar in one small hand. Kyle didn't want to bring her back home yet, not until Claire, or rather Mallory, was in custody. But that was the problem. She wasn't. After receiving Kyle's files, Sheriff Donovan had issued an immediate attempt to locate order. But by the time officers arrived at the boarding house where Claire had rented a room, she was already gone. Her belongings were still there, clothes folded neatly in a suitcase, a framed photo of a little girl that wasn't Lucy, and a single stuffed rabbit missing one ear. But she had vanished. No credit card activity, no phone ping, just silence. That silence now felt oppressive. The only comfort Kyle had was that Thor had been temporarily released earlier that afternoon, pending further behavioral review. Sheriff Donovan herself had pulled strings with animal control after reviewing the footage and toxicology reports. He's not a threat, he's a guardian, she had said. Kyle had picked him up in person. Thor was currently stationed in front of the kitchen's back door, massive body coiled like a spring, his ears flicked at the smallest sounds, eyes glinting in the faint light coming from the fridge display. He hadn't eaten, hadn't lain down. He was waiting, and Kyle knew what he was waiting for. It was 2:11 a.m. when Thor growled, not a whimper, not a bark. A deep, chesty rumble that made the glassware above the prep counter hum. Kyle sat upright instantly. Thor rose to his feet, every muscle alert. The growl rose again, sharper now. Kyle crossed the kitchen quietly, motioning Thor to stay low. He peered through the tiny slit in the rear door window. A figure moved near the alley. He could see her now. Blonde hair pulled into a hood, pale coat. She was carrying something long, cylindrical, almost glowing under the security light. A thermos or bottle. She walked slowly, deliberate, not like someone trying to break in, but like someone returning to something she thought was hers. Kyle didn't wait. He texted one word to Sheriff Donovan's direct line. "She's here." Then he turned to Thor, whispering, "Stay with Lucy." But Thor didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the door. A key clicked in the lock. Kyle ducked behind the pantry wall just as the door swung inward. Claire entered, clutching a metal thermos tightly to her chest, a small cloth bundle in her other hand. Her face was pale, makeup streaked down from dampness or sweat. Her eyes were frantic but strangely calm, as if she'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times. She took 3 steps into the kitchen before Thor growled again, this time louder, commanding. She froze. "Kyle," she called softly, her voice too sweet, like honey spoiled in heat. "I just wanted to explain." Kyle stepped into the open. "Put it down." She blinked. "It's not poison. It's just a blend, something calming. I wanted to show you that I was right, that she's like me, that she needs someone like me." Kyle's voice cut through the air. "You don't get to talk about my daughter." Claire flinched, then turned toward the dining room, gaze flicking toward where Lucy slept. Thor stepped between her and that line of sight, body rigid, growl steady now, louder than before. Claire's lip trembled. "He's so loyal, so good. He always knew I was the bad one, just like my ex's mutt, just like the courts. They all took her away from me." She raised the thermos an inch. Kyle's hand went to the bat by the wall. "Don't," he warned. Red and blue light spilled suddenly through the kitchen's front windows, flashing off steel and tile. Tires screeched in the alley behind the restaurant. "Step away from the girl," came Sheriff Donovan's voice, clear and firm. Claire dropped the thermos. It rolled across the floor and stopped near Thor's front paw. She collapsed to her knees, clutching the cloth in her hands like a rosary. "I just wanted a second chance," she whispered. Within seconds, officers flooded in through both doors, weapons lowered but ready. Claire didn't resist. She allowed the cuffs to snap around her wrists, tears falling silently down her cheeks. Donovan nodded once at Kyle, then motioned her team to escort the suspect out. Kyle walked slowly to the thermos, using a rag to pick it up. The smell was sharp fruity, with an edge of something chemical, too much sweetness, too artificial. He placed it inside a sealed bag as evidence. Thor sat down, panting slightly now. His eyes didn't leave Lucy. Donovan approached Kyle with a small sigh. "She'll be held without bail. We'll get forensics on that bottle. She confessed, didn't she?" Kyle nodded. "She said she hated kids who got to have families, because she lost her own." Donovan's face hardened. "There's always a reason. Doesn't mean it excuses anything." Lucy stirred in the booth just then, blinking up at the ceiling lights. Kyle rushed to her side, pulling the blanket tighter. "Daddy?" "It's okay, Bug. You're safe." "Thor's here." Lucy smiled sleepily and looked past him. "Good boy," she murmured. Thor's ears twitched. His tail thumped once. The sun returned to Seaside 3 days later, scattering the fog like curtains drawn after a long, uneasy dream. Warm, golden light filtered through the windows of Anderson's table, catching in the glassware, warming the tile floors, and pouring like honey over the booth by the kitchen table 7. Thor was lying there now, stretched out across the rug that Kyle had laid beneath the table just for him. His thick black and tan coat gleamed where the sunlight hit it. On his neck hung a new addition, a red bandana, slightly oversized for his strong neck, with a hand-sewn heart patch at the center. Lucy had made it herself. She now sat beside him, crisscross on the bench, drawing quietly in a spiral notebook, her curls still damp from the morning's bath. Occasionally she looked down at Thor and smiled. The dog's eyes remained fixed on her, not in watchfulness, but in quiet companionship, like a soldier at ease but never asleep. The bell over the front door chimed. Kyle looked up from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a towel. For the last 3 days, business had been a wave-steady, grateful, heartfelt. People weren't just coming in for pancakes anymore. They were coming to see the dog, and to say thank you. An older couple entered first, Mrs. Ames with her cotton-white bob and floral scarf, and her husband Harold, who walked with a cane carved with a trout pattern. Both were regulars from the earliest days of the diner. "We brought him this," Mrs. Ames said, handing over a basket of homemade liver treats. "We had a shepherd once. Not like him, though. He's something else." Kyle smiled and accepted the gift, setting it on the counter beside a growing collection of tributes, thank you, cards, framed photos, even a miniature cape someone had embroidered with K9 Hero in bold red thread. News of the incident had gone viral. A local journalist named Ray Flores, a young Latina reporter from the Seaside Gazette, had interviewed Kyle just yesterday. Ray was sharp, curious, and had a quick sense of humor. Her article, titled "Guardian at Table 7, The Dog Who Knew," had caught fire online. She'd captured the perfect image: Thor sitting at the booth, Lucy asleep with her head on his back. Now people were calling him the Sentinel Shepherd and Guardian of Table 7. It wasn't just a story. It was hope. At the far end of the dining room, Emma leaned over a booth, setting down a fresh plate of sourdough French toast. Her curly red hair was pulled into a tidy bun, and she wore gold hoop earrings that swayed every time she moved. Her apron was still dusty from flour, and her hands were always moving. But today there was a lightness to her step that hadn't been there before. Jordan was waiting at the register, a sheepish smile on his face. In one hand, he held a Togo cup of black coffee, and in the other, a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked up from the Saturday market. Emma glanced up at him, her mouth twitching. "That for me or for Thor?" Jordan grinned. "Depends on who's hungrier." She smirked, wiped her hands, and walked toward him. "Well, I don't eat flowers, but I'll take the coffee." They walked outside together, the morning light catching on Jordan's jacket and the way Emma's laughter caught in the breeze. They had been dancing around each other for weeks, but now the weight had lifted. Inside, Kyle watched from a distance, his arms crossed, a quiet smile on his face. He turned back toward Lucy and Thor. "You did good, buddy," he murmured. Behind him, the bell chimed again. This time, it was Sheriff Claire Donovan. She walked in with her usual clean-cut authority dark jeans, utility boots, navy shirt with a gold badge tucked under the lapel. Her hair was pulled back in a low ponytail streaked with silver, and a folder was tucked beneath her arm. Kyle met her at the counter. Good news? Officially, she said, placing the folder down. Thor is cleared of all charges. The incident has been reclassified as protective intervention. Animal Control has removed him from their watch list. And as of today, he's recognized by the state as a certified emotional support animal. Kyle let out a long breath. Also, Donovan added, the DA's office is pressing full charges against Mallory Keene. Attempted poisoning, identity fraud, and endangerment of a minor. There's talk of federal attention given her history. She won't be seeing the outside anytime soon. Kyle nodded, the relief settling like warm stone in his chest. Thank you, Claire, for everything. She smiled, softening just a little. Don't thank me. Thank him. She looked over at Thor, who was now curled up at Lucy's feet, head resting gently against her socked ankle. His eyes, ever watchful, met hers with quiet acknowledgement. Later that day, a small group of neighborhood kids arrived with their parents, asking if they could see the hero dog. Kyle knelt beside Thor and whispered, Okay, but only if you promise not to call him a hero to his face. He's humble. Lucy giggled and added, He likes tummy rubs more than praise. The kids giggled too. And so, for the first time in a long while, Anderson's table buzzed not just with orders and plates, but with stories. Stories of how a dog protected a child when no one else could, how instincts can be stronger than science, and how loyalty has a name, and sometimes 4 paws. The morning sunlight spilled golden across Seaside, the kind that made everything feel freshly washed and wide awake. A soft ocean breeze slipped through the open windows of Anderson's table, carrying with it the scent of sea salt and spring flowers. The bell above the front door jingled lazily as customers trickled in, no longer with urgency, but with a quiet reverence, as if stepping into a place that held something sacred. Kyle stood behind the counter, elbow deep in soapy water, polishing glasses one at a time, with the care of someone not just running a restaurant, but tending a home. His shoulders, once taut with weeks of worry, had loosened, and the lines around his eyes had softened. The man who once only moved with quiet urgency now allowed himself to pause like now, when he looked up and caught sight of Lucy at table 7. The booth, forever etched into their story, had become something more, a sanctuary. Lucy, wearing a sundress with yellow daisies and a blue clip in her curls, was curled up on one side of the bench, her knees tucked under her as she concentrated on her drawing. In front of her sat a pack of colored pencils and a glass of chocolate milk with a silly straw. Beneath the table, half shaded by the booth's wooden base, Thor lay stretched across the floor, his head resting on his front paws, eyes closed, but ears alert. The red bandana still hung around his neck, the heart-shaped patch catching the light every time he moved. He was 10 years old now, graying around the muzzle, his build still powerful but gentler somehow. His tail thumped every time Lucy leaned over to pat his head, which she did often without words, as if to say, I remember, without needing to speak. A pair of travelers mid-30s, both sun-tanned and wearing hiking boots dusted from a morning trail, sat at the bar sipping coffee. The woman, wearing a faded Oregon Trail hoodie and tortoiseshell glasses, leaned toward the man and whispered, Is that the dog from the story? Kyle caught it and smiled as he rinsed a plate. Yep, that's Thor. The man looked over at the booth and nodded. He's even more majestic in person. Kyle dried his hands and walked out to top off their mugs. He saved my daughter's life, and in the process, he reminded all of us that some instincts are worth trusting. The woman's eyes softened. We read about it in the Gazette, and then again on that blog Paws of Valor. We were passing through and just had to stop. You're not the only ones, Kyle said with a chuckle. We had a school bus detour here last week. Bunch of third graders lined up just to pet him. Poor guy slept for 6 hours after. From the far side of the restaurant, Emma emerged from the kitchen, apron dusted with powdered sugar, balancing a tray of warm cinnamon rolls. Her red curls were tied up messily, and she wore a sly smile as she caught sight of Jordan walking through the front door carrying a box of fresh strawberries. Late again, she teased. Jordan shrugged, grinning. Worth it. Got you the good ones. Vendor said they were picked this morning. Smooth, she replied, snatching the box with one hand and brushing a kiss to his cheek with the other, before disappearing back behind the swinging door. Thor lifted his head slightly at the exchange, then let it fall back onto Lucy's foot. Good boy, she whispered. On the wall behind the counter, above the coffee station and beside a shelf lined with family photos and kid drawings, hung a new wooden plaque. hand-carved and varnished by a local craftsman who'd refused payment. It read, "This place is protected by 4 paws and a loyal heart. Love is served here with waffles and courage." Underneath, smaller letters had been etched, "In honor of Thor, guardian of Table 7. By mid-morning, a soft group of retirees had gathered by the window seat, sipping chamomile and sharing stories of the dogs they'd once loved. One man with a gravelly voice and a navy hat talked about his K9 partner from the Gulf War, while a woman with silver curls and a trembling voice whispered, "I always believed animals know more than we do. This just proves it." Kyle refilled coffee cups, but his eyes kept returning to Lucy and Thor. Watching her color, tongue slightly out as she concentrated, her crayon dragging over the paper in great looping hearts and stars, it struck him how normal she looked, how peace had returned, gently and without fanfare. Claire Mallory was now awaiting trial. The court had denied bail, citing risk and prior history. The last Kyle had heard, her defense attorney had requested a psychological evaluation. But none of that haunted him anymore. He had turned the page. So had Lucy. "Daddy!" Lucy called, waving her drawing. "Look!" He walked over and leaned down. She had drawn Thor with a golden crown and a superhero cape, Lucy beside him in a chef's apron holding a plate of cookies. Behind them was the restaurant tall windows, big sunshine, and a sign that read, "Heroes eat here." Kyle smiled and kissed her forehead. "Looks like I'm out of a job. You and Thor are in charge now." She beamed. "We'll keep everything safe." And Kyle believed her. As the sun climbed higher, laughter rose through the windows, the sound of forks clinking, milk being poured, children giggling at a tail wag. Thor shifting just enough to let his paw rest gently against Lucy's ankle again. No sirens, no locked doors, no panic, just light. And the dog, who never blinked. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come on 4 paws, with quiet eyes and a heart that never stops guarding. Thor didn't just protect Lucy. He reminded all of us that even in the ordinary moments, God places his angels where we least expect them. Maybe it's a loyal dog who refuses to blink. Maybe it's the child who still trusts the world. Or maybe it's the strength we find in love that never gives up. In a world that often forgets to slow down, this story is a gentle nudge to look closer, to believe that God still works in quiet ways, through loyalty, through instinct, and through courage that doesn't need words. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below how this reminded you of your own guardian, your own moment of grace. And if you believe that God still sends protectors to walk beside us, type amen below. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of love, redemption, and second chances. May God bless you and all those who watch over you.